The black government car pulled up slowly to the famous gates of Buckingham Palace on a bright Tuesday morning in London. The engine made a quiet purring sound as it came to a complete stop near the entrance, where tourists were already gathering to take pictures. Inside the expensive vehicle sat Colonel Marcus Wellington, a man who believed he was more important than most people around him. Colonel Wellington looked at himself in the small mirror inside the car and smiled with satisfaction. His dark blue military uniform was pressed perfectly without a single wrinkle anywhere. The golden buttons on his jacket shined brightly in the morning sunlight that came through the car window. On his chest were many colorful medals and ribbons that showed his years of service in different military positions. Each medal told a story of his achievements, and Wellington made sure everyone could see them clearly. The colonel opened the car door and stepped out onto the stone pavement with confidence. His black leather boots were polished so well that they reflected the sky above like mirrors. He stood tall and straight, pushing his chest forward to display his medals prominently. Wellington wanted everyone who saw him to know immediately that he was a person of high rank and importance in the military. As he walked toward the palace entrance, Wellington noticed how other visitors looked at him with curiosity and respect. Some tourists whispered to each other and pointed at his impressive uniform. A few people even took pictures of him from a distance, thinking he might be someone famous or important. This attention made Wellington feel even more proud of himself and his position. The morning air was cool and fresh, but Wellington barely noticed the beautiful weather. His mind was focused entirely on the business meeting he was about to attend inside the palace. He had been invited to discuss military security matters with other high-ranking officials. This invitation made him feel very special because not many people get to enter the famous royal residence for official business. Wellington had heard many stories about Buckingham Palace and the soldiers who guard it. Other officers had told him that these royal guards were too serious and followed rules too strictly. They said the guards acted like robots and never showed any flexibility or common sense. Wellington believed that his superior rank would automatically make these guards treat him with extra respect and special consideration. The colonel had spent many years working in different military divisions across the country. In every place he worked, junior soldiers would immediately salute him and follow his orders without question. He expected the same treatment everywhere he went, regardless of the specific rules or traditions of each location. Wellington truly believed that his rank gave him authority over all military personnel, no matter what their specific duties might be. As he approached the main entrance of the palace, Wellington felt excited about showing his authority to the famous royal guards. He imagined how impressed they would be when they saw his medals and learned about his important position. The colonel expected them to give him special treatment and perhaps even escort him personally to his meeting location. The magnificent palace building rose high above him with its cream-colored walls and countless windows. British flags waved gently in the morning breeze from tall poles on the roof. The architecture was stunning and had witnessed centuries of royal history. But Wellington was too focused on his own importance to appreciate the incredible building he was about to enter. He adjusted his uniform one final time and checked that his medals were positioned correctly. Wellington wanted to make the perfect first impression on everyone he would meet inside the palace. Little did he know that his assumptions about respect and authority were about to be challenged in a way he never expected. The events that would unfold in the next few minutes would teach him a lesson he would never forget about true military professionalism and duty. At the main entrance of Buckingham Palace stood a figure that looked like it had been carved from stone. Guard James Morrison remained perfectly motionless in his position, wearing the famous red tunic and tall black bearskin hat that made royal guards instantly recognizable around the world. His rifle was held at exactly the right angle, and his eyes stared straight ahead without blinking or moving even slightly. Morrison had been standing in this same spot for over 2 hours already, but he showed no signs of tiredness or discomfort. His training had taught him to ignore pain, weather, and distractions while on duty. The morning sun was getting warmer, but sweat never appeared on his face. His breathing was so controlled and quiet that people walking nearby could barely tell he was alive. The young guard had an interesting background that most visitors never knew about. Before joining the Royal Guards, Morrison had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, where he learned about real danger and responsibility. He had protected his fellow soldiers in combat zones where one mistake could mean life or death. Those experiences taught him that following orders exactly was not just about rules, but about keeping people safe. Morrison was 26 years old and had been guarding the royal family for 8 years. Every single day he took his duty seriously because he understood the importance of his role. The Queen and her family trusted him and other guards to protect them from any possible threat. This responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders, and he never forgot how important his job was. During his guard duty, Morrison had seen all kinds of people approach the palace entrance. Tourists from every country in the world came to take pictures and try to make him smile or laugh. Children would wave at him and make funny faces. Adults would ask him questions or try to start conversations. Some people even tried to touch him or his uniform to see if he would react. Professional photographers often took pictures of Morrison and other guards for newspapers and magazines. Sometimes famous people or politicians would walk by and expect special attention. But Morrison had learned to treat everyone the same way. His orders were clear and simple. Stay in position, stay alert, and do not move unless there was a real emergency or unless his commanding officer gave him direct orders. The guard had developed an amazing ability to notice everything happening around him without moving his eyes or head. He could hear conversations from far away and see movement in all directions using his peripheral vision. Morrison knew where every person was standing, which tourists were taking pictures, and if anyone was acting suspiciously. On this particular morning, Morrison had already noticed several interesting things. A group of school children had tried to make him laugh by telling jokes. An elderly woman had asked him for directions to the nearest bathroom. A man with a large camera had been taking pictures of him for over 10 minutes. But Morrison remained completely focused on his duty through all of these distractions. The red fabric of his uniform was made from the finest wool and had been carefully tailored to fit his body perfectly. The golden buttons and decorative elements were polished until they gleamed in the sunlight. His black leather boots were shined to mirror perfection, and his white gloves were spotless. Every part of his appearance had to meet the highest standards because he represented the British monarchy. Morrison felt proud to wear this historic uniform that connected him to hundreds of years of military tradition. Guards before him had stood in this same spot protecting kings and queens through wars, celebrations, and times of peace. He was part of something much bigger than himself, and this knowledge gave him strength during long hours of standing perfectly still. The guard's face showed no emotion, but his mind was always working. He was constantly evaluating potential threats and staying ready to act if necessary. Morrison understood that his stillness was not just for show, but was an important part of his security duties. Any sudden movement or break in concentration could create a vulnerability that enemies might try to exploit. Colonel Wellington walked directly toward Guard Morrison, with heavy, deliberate steps that echoed loudly on the stone courtyard. His polished black boots made sharp clicking sounds that seemed to announce his approach to everyone within hearing distance. The colonel held his head high and his shoulders back, trying to project as much authority as possible through his body language and confident stride. As Wellington got closer to the motionless guard, he expected Morrison to notice his impressive uniform and immediately recognize his superior military rank. The colonel was used to junior soldiers spotting his medals and ribbons from far away and quickly preparing to show proper respect. He fully anticipated that Morrison would break his rigid stance and snap to attention the moment he saw the approaching senior officer. But Morrison remained completely still, his eyes fixed straight ahead, as if Wellington did not exist at all. The guard's face showed no expression or acknowledgement of the colonel's presence. His breathing stayed perfectly controlled, and his posture remained unchanged. To Morrison, this was just another visitor approaching the palace entrance, and his duty required him to maintain his position, regardless of who was walking nearby. Wellington stopped just 2 feet away from Morrison, close enough that he could see every detail of the guard's face and uniform. The colonel expected this proximity to force some kind of reaction or recognition from the young soldier. He waited for several seconds, expecting Morrison to turn his head, or at least move his eyes to acknowledge the superior officer standing so close to him. When Morrison continued to stare straight ahead without any reaction, Wellington felt his face beginning to flush with anger and embarrassment. The colonel was not used to being ignored by anyone, especially not by someone he considered to be a lower-ranking soldier. His pride was wounded by what he saw as a clear sign of disrespect toward his authority and position. Wellington cleared his throat loudly, making a sound that carried across the courtyard and caused several nearby tourists to turn and look in his direction. He expected this obvious signal to get Morrison's attention and prompt the proper military response he felt he deserved. But the guard remained as still as a statue, showing no awareness of the colonel's presence or his attempts to get noticed. The colonel's anger began to build as he realized that his usual methods of commanding attention were not working. He was used to soldiers jumping to attention the moment they saw him coming. Wellington had spent years in positions where his rank automatically earned him immediate respect and obedience from junior personnel. This situation was completely outside his normal experience. Wellington raised his voice to a level that could be heard clearly by everyone in the immediate area. He commanded Morrison to give him a proper military salute immediately and to show the respect that his rank demanded. The colonel's words carried a tone of authority and impatience that made it clear he expected instant compliance with his order. The loud command caused several tourists to stop what they were doing and turn to watch the unfolding scene. Some visitors pulled out their phones to record what appeared to be an interesting confrontation between two military personnel. A few people whispered to each other, wondering what was happening and why the officer seemed so upset with the silent guard. Morrison heard every word of Wellington's command clearly, but his training and orders were very specific about when he could and could not break his position. The guard understood that maintaining his post was not just about tradition or ceremony, but was a crucial part of his security duties. Breaking position without proper authorization could compromise the safety of the royal family and violate his sworn oath as a royal guard. Wellington's face grew redder as he repeated his demand for a salute, this time speaking even louder and with more authority in his voice. He could not understand why his clear order was being ignored by what he assumed was a junior soldier who should automatically obey commands from superior officers. The unusual scene between Colonel Wellington and Guard Morrison began attracting attention from visitors throughout the palace courtyard. What had started as a private confrontation between two military personnel was quickly becoming a public spectacle that drew curious onlookers from all directions. A family of tourists from Germany stopped taking pictures of the palace architecture and turned their cameras toward the argument unfolding near the entrance. The father whispered to his wife in their native language, trying to understand what was happening between the angry officer and the motionless guard. Their two young children pointed excitedly at the scene, fascinated by the drama they were witnessing. An elderly British couple who had been feeding pigeons nearby walked closer to get a better view of the confrontation. The woman adjusted her glasses and strained to hear the heated words being exchanged. Her husband shook his head disapprovingly at Wellington's loud behavior, remembering his own military service decades earlier and recognizing poor leadership when he saw it. A group of American college students on a study abroad program stopped their guided tour to watch the unfolding drama. They pulled out their smartphones and began recording videos, thinking this might be something interesting to share with friends back home. One student whispered to another that this looked like it might go viral on social media if the confrontation continued to escalate. Palace security officers who were positioned at various points around the grounds began taking notice of the growing crowd and the raised voices. They started moving closer to the entrance while trying to appear casual and non-threatening. Their job was to maintain order and protect both visitors and royal property, so they needed to be prepared to intervene if the situation got out of control. Wellington noticed the gathering audience and felt both embarrassed and more determined to assert his authority. Having witnesses to his confrontation with Morrison made him feel like he needed to win this battle of wills to save face in front of so many people. The colonel believed that backing down now would make him look weak and undermine his reputation as a strong military leader. More tourists continued to join the growing circle of spectators, drawn by curiosity about what was causing such a commotion at the famous palace. Some visitors were confused about whether this was part of an official ceremony or demonstration. Others realized they were witnessing a genuine conflict between two real military personnel. A Japanese tour group approached with their guide, who tried to explain in broken English that this was not a planned entertainment, but appeared to be a serious disagreement. The tourists bowed politely and kept their distance, while still trying to observe the interesting cultural interaction taking place before them. Morrison remained perfectly aware of the crowd forming around him but showed no outward reaction to the growing audience. His training had prepared him for situations where crowds might gather to watch the guards or try to provoke reactions. The presence of more people actually reinforced his determination to maintain his professional composure and follow his orders exactly. Several palace staff members noticed the commotion from windows inside the building and began discussing whether they should report the incident to their supervisors. The situation was unusual enough to warrant attention from higher authorities, especially since it involved what appeared to be a dispute between military personnel at such a sensitive location. Wellington's voice grew even louder as he became aware that dozens of people were now watching his confrontation with the silent guard. He felt pressure to demonstrate his authority convincingly in front of this impromptu audience. The colonel repeated his demands for a salute while gesturing dramatically with his hands to emphasize his points. Children in the crowd asked their parents why the man in uniform was shouting at the guard who would not move. Parents struggled to explain the situation since they did not fully understand it themselves. Some adults tried to quiet their children and move them away from what appeared to be an increasingly tense confrontation. The atmosphere in the courtyard had changed completely from the peaceful morning scene of tourists enjoying their visit to a charged environment where everyone was focused on the drama unfolding between Wellington and Morrison. Camera flashes and phone cameras captured every moment of the escalating confrontation that had been unfolding. The guard continued in his calm, professional voice, but his next words contained information that made Colonel Wellington's face drain of all color and caused gasps of surprise from the watching crowd. Morrison revealed that he held the rank of sergeant within the elite Royal Guard Regiment, a position that required years of exceptional service and demonstrated leadership abilities. The Guard explained that Royal Guards are not simply ceremonial soldiers who stand at attention for tourists, but are highly trained military professionals selected from the finest personnel in the British Armed Forces. The Guard continued his revelation by mentioning his extensive military background before joining the Royal Guards. Morrison had served multiple combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, where he had led infantry squads through dangerous missions and earned commendations for bravery under fire. His experience included urban warfare, counterterrorism operations, and protection of high-value military and civilian targets. Morrison explained that his combat experience had included protecting British military commanders and visiting government officials in war zones where the threat level was much higher than anything faced at Buckingham Palace. The Guard had learned to make life and death decisions quickly while maintaining absolute discipline and following orders precisely, even when under enemy fire. The watching crowd listened in amazement as Morrison described his qualifications for his current position. He mentioned that Royal Guards must pass rigorous physical fitness tests, extensive background investigations, psychological evaluations, and specialized training programs that last for months. Only soldiers with proven records of excellence and reliability are considered for these prestigious assignments. Morrison revealed that his training for the Royal Guard position had included advanced security procedures, crowd control techniques, weapons handling, emergency response protocols, and detailed study of potential threats to the royal family. The Guard explained that his seemingly simple duty of standing motionless was actually part of a complex security system designed by experts. Wellington's embarrassment deepened as he realized that he had been lecturing and threatening someone whose military experience and qualifications were potentially superior to his own. The colonel began to understand that Morrison was not a junior soldier who could be bullied into submission, but was a seasoned combat veteran who had earned his position through merit and dedication. The guard mentioned that Royal Guards work closely with other security agencies, including Scotland Yard, MI5, and international intelligence services, to protect the royal family from various types of threats. Morrison explained that his training had included learning to identify suspicious behavior, coordinating with plainclothes security officers, and responding to different types of emergency situations. Morrison's calm recitation of his credentials and experience created a stark contrast with Wellington's earlier angry demands and threats. The crowd began to see the confrontation in a completely different light, recognizing that the quiet guard had been demonstrating true professionalism, while the loud colonel had been acting inappropriately. The guard explained that Royal Guards must maintain their positions regardless of weather conditions, personal discomfort, distractions from tourists, or pressure from other military personnel. Morrison mentioned that this discipline was not just about tradition, but was essential for maintaining the security perimeter around the royal residence. Wellington realized that his assumptions about military hierarchy and his authority over all soldiers had been completely wrong in this situation. The colonel understood that Morrison operated under a different command structure with different rules and responsibilities that took precedence over requests from outside officers. Morrison concluded his explanation by respectfully noting that he appreciated Wellington's military service and understood the colonel's expectation of receiving proper respect. However, the guard firmly stated that his duty to protect the royal family superseded all other considerations, and he could not abandon his post for any reason other than direct orders from his proper commanding officers. The crowd's attitude had shifted completely during Morrison's explanation. People who had initially thought the guard was being disrespectful now understood that they were witnessing a masterclass in military professionalism and dedication to duty. Many spectators began looking at Wellington with disapproval, recognizing that his behavior had been inappropriate and based on incorrect assumptions about his authority in this situation. After enduring several minutes of Colonel Wellington's aggressive demands and threats, Guard Morrison finally decided that the situation required a response. The guard had been carefully evaluating whether Wellington's behavior posed any threat to palace security or whether intervention was necessary to maintain order. Morrison concluded that speaking was now appropriate to de-escalate the confrontation professionally. Morrison's voice cut through the courtyard air like a sharp blade, clear and steady despite the tension of the moment. His words carried the confidence of someone who knew exactly what his duties were and had no doubt about his authority to perform them. The guard spoke loudly enough for the entire crowd to hear, but his tone remained respectful and professional throughout. The guard explained to Wellington and all the listening spectators that he was currently on active guard duty protecting the royal family and their residents. Morrison stated clearly that his orders were very specific about when he could and could not break his position or abandon his post. He emphasized that these orders came directly from his commanding officers and were not subject to negotiation or modification by outside personnel. Morrison continued his explanation by telling Wellington that only two types of people had the authority to order him to move from his position. The first was the Queen herself or another member of the immediate royal family. The second was his direct commanding officer within the Royal Guard Regiment, who had given him his current assignment and post orders. The guard's words sent a shockwave through the watching crowd, and many people began murmuring to each other with surprise and newfound understanding. Tourists who had been watching the confrontation suddenly realized that the silent soldier had been following proper military protocol all along, while the angry officer had been making inappropriate demands. Wellington's mouth fell open in complete surprise at Morrison's articulate and confident response. The colonel had expected the guard to either continue ignoring him or to finally give in to his demands. He had not anticipated such a clear and knowledgeable explanation of military procedures that made his own behavior appear inappropriate and uninformed. Morrison explained that royal guards undergo extensive training not only in ceremonial duties, but also in security protocols that are designed to protect the most important people in the British government. He mentioned that breaking position without proper authorization could create security vulnerabilities that enemies of the state might try to exploit. The guard's professional manner of speaking impressed many people in the crowd who had initially thought he was being disrespectful to the colonel. Morrison's calm explanation demonstrated that he was not being stubborn or rude, but was simply following his sworn duty as a protector of the royal family. Wellington began to realize that his understanding of military hierarchy and protocol might not apply in this specific situation. The colonel had assumed that his rank would automatically give him authority over all military personnel, but Morrison's explanation suggested that the Royal Guards operated under different rules and command structures. Morrison continued speaking, his voice remaining steady and professional despite the pressure of addressing both an angry superior officer and a large crowd of witnesses. The guard explained that his training had taught him to distinguish between legitimate orders from his chain of command and requests from other military personnel who were not part of his direct authority structure. The guard mentioned that royal guards are stationed at their posts for specific time periods and cannot leave their positions until properly relieved by another guard or dismissed by their commanding officer. Morrison explained that this system ensures continuous protection for the royal family and prevents any gaps in security coverage. Several people in the crowd began nodding with understanding and respect for Morrison's dedication to his duty. Tourists who had initially thought the guard was being rude to the colonel now realized they were witnessing a demonstration of true military professionalism and commitment to sworn obligations. Wellington's confident demeanor began to crumble as he processed Morrison's words and started to understand that his demands had been inappropriate from the beginning. The colonel realized that he had been making a public scene based on incorrect assumptions about his authority in this specific location and situation. Morrison concluded his response by respectfully acknowledging Wellington's military rank and service record, while firmly maintaining that he could not comply with orders that would require him to abandon his assigned duty post. The guard's words were diplomatic, but left no doubt about his intention to remain at his position, regardless of any additional pressure or threats. Morrison was not finished speaking, and what he said next would completely change how everyone viewed the confrontation that had been unfolding. The guard continued in his calm, professional voice, but his next words contained information that made Colonel Wellington's face drain of all color and caused gasps of surprise from the watching crowd. Morrison revealed that he held the rank of sergeant within the elite Royal Guard Regiment, a position that required years of exceptional service and demonstrated leadership abilities. The guard explained that Royal Guards are not simply ceremonial soldiers who stand at attention for tourists, but are highly trained military professionals selected from the finest personnel in the British Armed Forces. The guard continued his revelation by mentioning his extensive military background before joining the Royal Guards. Morrison had served multiple combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, where he had led infantry squads through dangerous missions and earned commendations for bravery under fire. His experience included urban warfare, counterterrorism operations, and protection of high-value military and civilian targets. Morrison explained that his combat experience had included protecting British military commanders and visiting government officials in war zones where the threat level was much higher than anything faced at Buckingham Palace. The guard had learned to make life and death decisions quickly while maintaining absolute discipline and following orders precisely, even when under enemy fire. The watching crowd listened in amazement as Morrison described his qualifications for his current position. He mentioned that Royal Guards must pass rigorous physical fitness tests, extensive background investigations, psychological evaluations, and specialized training programs that last for months. Only soldiers with proven records of excellence and reliability are considered for these prestigious assignments. Morrison revealed that his training for the Royal Guard position had included advanced security procedures, crowd control techniques, weapons handling, emergency response protocols, and detailed study of potential threats to the royal family. The guard explained that his seemingly simple duty of standing motionless was actually part of a complex security system designed by experts. Wellington's embarrassment deepened as he realized that he had been lecturing and threatening someone whose military experience and qualifications were potentially superior to his own. The colonel began to understand that Morrison was not a junior soldier who could be bullied into submission, but was a seasoned combat veteran who had earned his position through merit and dedication. The guard mentioned that Royal Guards work closely with other security agencies, including Scotland Yard, MI5, and International Intelligence Services, to protect the royal family from various types of threats. Morrison explained that his training had included learning to identify suspicious behavior, coordinating with plainclothes security officers, and responding to different types of emergency situations. Morrison's calm recitation of his credentials and experience created a stark contrast with Wellington's earlier angry demands and threats. The crowd began to see the confrontation in a completely different light, recognizing that the quiet guard had been demonstrating true professionalism, while the loud colonel had been acting inappropriately. The guard explained that Royal Guards must maintain their positions regardless of weather conditions, personal discomfort, distractions from tourists, or pressure from other military personnel. Morrison mentioned that this discipline was not just about tradition, but was essential for maintaining the security perimeter around the royal residence. Wellington realized that his assumptions about military hierarchy and his authority over all soldiers had been completely wrong in this situation. The colonel understood that Morrison operated under a different command structure with different rules and responsibilities that took precedence over requests from outside officers. Morrison concluded his explanation by respectfully noting that he appreciated Wellington's military service and understood the colonel's expectation of receiving proper respect. However, the guard firmly stated that his duty to protect the royal family superseded all other considerations, and he could not abandon his post for any reason other than direct orders from his proper commanding officers. The full weight of his mistake crashed down on Colonel Wellington like an avalanche as he realized that dozens of people had witnessed his embarrassing confrontation with Guard Morrison. The colonel's face burned with shame as he understood that everyone in the crowd had heard Morrison's professional explanation and could now see clearly who had been behaving appropriately and who had not. Wellington looked around at the faces of the spectators and saw expressions ranging from disapproval to amusement to outright disgust at his behavior. The tourists who had been recording the confrontation with their phones and cameras had captured every moment of his angry demands and threats, as well as Morrison's calm and professional responses that had exposed the colonel's ignorance. An elderly British gentleman in the crowd shook his head sadly and made a comment loud enough for others to hear about how some officers have forgotten what real military leadership looked like. His words stung Wellington deeply because they came from someone who appeared to be a military veteran himself and understood the difference between true authority and bullying behavior. The American college students continued recording with their smartphones, and Wellington realized with horror that videos of his humiliating confrontation would likely be shared on social media platforms within hours. The colonel imagined his inappropriate behavior being viewed by thousands or even millions of people around the world, potentially damaging his reputation permanently. Wellington noticed that several palace security officers had moved closer during the confrontation and were now positioned where they could intervene quickly if necessary. The presence of these additional security personnel made it clear that his behavior had been noticed by official authorities and might have consequences beyond just public embarrassment. The colonel realized that Morrison had handled the entire situation with perfect military bearing, while he himself had lost control of his emotions and acted in a way that reflected poorly on his leadership abilities and professional judgment. Wellington understood that any fair observer would conclude that the guard had been the superior soldier in this encounter. Children in the crowd were asking their parents why the angry man had been yelling at the nice guard who was just doing his job. These innocent questions from young visitors made Wellington's behavior seem even more inappropriate and highlighted how obvious it should have been that Morrison was simply following his duties correctly. Wellington began to understand that his confrontation with Morrison could have serious consequences for his own military career if word of the incident reached his superiors. The colonel realized that his behavior could be seen as harassment of a fellow service member and might violate military regulations about proper conduct and respect for other soldiers. The German family that had been watching the confrontation was discussing the incident in their native language, but their disapproving expressions and gestures toward Wellington made it clear that they were criticizing his behavior. The colonel felt humiliated knowing that his actions were being judged negatively by people from other countries who were visiting Britain. Morrison remained at his post throughout Wellington's growing realization of his mistake, showing no signs of gloating or satisfaction at the colonel's obvious discomfort. The guard's continued professionalism, even after being vindicated, made Wellington's earlier behavior seem even more petty and inappropriate by comparison. Palace staff members who had been watching from windows inside the building were now discussing the incident among themselves. Wellington could see them pointing in his direction and knew that reports of his behavior would likely reach higher authorities within the palace administration and possibly even the royal household itself. The colonel's carefully maintained image as a competent and respected military leader was crumbling before his eyes as he realized how many people had witnessed his poor judgment and inappropriate behavior. Wellington understood that this incident would likely be remembered and discussed long after he had left the palace grounds. Wellington felt trapped by the situation he had created for himself. He could not continue his demands without appearing even more foolish, but he also could not easily back down without admitting that his behavior had been wrong from the beginning. The colonel realized that any course of action he chose now would be seen by the watching crowd as an admission of his mistake. Colonel Wellington stood frozen for several long moments as the full reality of his situation became completely clear to him. The confident officer who had arrived at Buckingham Palace that morning expecting automatic respect and deference was gone, replaced by a man who finally understood how badly he had misjudged both the situation and the person he had been confronting. Without saying another word, Wellington took a step backward from Morrison's position. The colonel's movement was hesitant and uncertain, completely different from the bold strides he had taken when approaching the guard earlier. His face showed a mixture of embarrassment, regret, and the dawning realization that he needed to remove himself from this situation as quickly as possible. Wellington turned away from Morrison and began walking toward the palace gates where his government car was still waiting. His walk was no longer the confident march of a man who believed in his own importance. Instead, the colonel moved with the quick, nervous steps of someone who wanted to escape from an embarrassing situation before it could get any worse. The watching crowd parted to create a path for Wellington as he made his retreat, but their eyes followed his every step. Some spectators continued taking pictures and recording videos of his departure, capturing the moment when his arrogant confidence had been completely deflated by Morrison's professional response and shocking revelations. As Wellington walked away, conversations broke out among the tourists and other visitors who had witnessed the confrontation. People discussed what they had seen and heard, with most expressing admiration for Morrison's calm professionalism and criticism of Wellington's inappropriate behavior. The incident was already becoming a story that these witnesses would remember and share with others. Several visitors approached Morrison after Wellington's departure to express their respect for how he had handled the difficult situation. The guard accepted their comments politely but quickly returned to his silent, motionless stance, demonstrating that he considered the confrontation to be over and was focused on returning to his normal duties. Wellington reached his waiting car and fumbled with the door handle, his hand shaking slightly from the stress and embarrassment of the previous few minutes. The colonel glanced back, once toward the palace entrance, where Morrison continued standing at his post, looking exactly the same as he had before the entire confrontation began. The driver of Wellington's government car noticed his passenger's obviously distressed condition and asked if everything was all right. The colonel mumbled something about the meeting being canceled and instructed the driver to leave the palace grounds immediately. Wellington sank into the back seat and tried to avoid looking out the windows at the tourists who were still discussing the incident. As the car pulled away from Buckingham Palace, Wellington began to process the lessons he had learned from his encounter with Morrison. The colonel realized that true military authority comes from competence, professionalism, and respect for duty, rather than from rank alone, or the ability to intimidate others into compliance. Wellington understood that he had made assumptions about Morrison based on incomplete information and had failed to recognize the guard's extensive qualifications and combat experience. The colonel realized that his behavior had been based on prejudice and arrogance rather than on facts or proper military protocol. The incident at Buckingham Palace became a turning point in Wellington's understanding of leadership and respect within the military. The colonel began to recognize that commanding respect from other soldiers required earning it through professional behavior and competence rather than demanding it through rank and intimidation. Over the following days and weeks, Wellington reflected on his encounter with Morrison and began making changes to his leadership style and approach to working with other military personnel. The colonel learned to listen more carefully, make fewer assumptions, and show greater respect for the duties and responsibilities of soldiers at all levels. Morrison continued performing his guard duties at Buckingham Palace with the same dedication and professionalism he had always shown. The incident with Wellington became just another example of the challenges that royal guards face while protecting the royal family and maintaining the dignity of their positions. The story of the confrontation between Wellington and Morrison was shared and retold by many of the witnesses who had been present that morning. It became an example of how true military professionalism and dedication to duty can triumph over arrogance and misused authority, even when facing pressure from higher-ranking personnel. Wellington never returned to Buckingham Palace, but he carried the memory of his encounter with Morrison for the rest of his military career. The lesson he learned that morning about respect, duty, and true leadership helped him become a better officer and a more thoughtful leader in all his future assignments and responsibilities.